The evening air was thick with the aroma of freshly cooked stew. Mama Tobi placed the steaming bowl before her husband, but he didn't touch it. "I'm not eating this," he said. Mama Tobi frowned. "Why?" Baba Tobi scoffed. "Does it taste like Nshala's food? Hers makes you crave more." Mama Tobi slammed the table. "Nshala again. So my food is not good enough?" He stood, grabbing his shirt. "If you won't cook like her, I'd rather eat at the market." He walked out, leaving his wife fuming, her food untouched.
Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe, comment, like, and share. Thank you. Back to the story.
Once upon a time, in a prosperous village surrounded by rolling hills and golden farmlands, life was peaceful. The villagers thrived on their harvests, their bustling market full of fresh produce, meat, and handmade goods. Families shared meals around their fires, and the air was filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked food. But everything changed when Nshala, the silent cook, arrived. No one knew where she came from, only that one day, she appeared in the village market with large pots of steaming food. At first, she was just another vendor, one among many selling their meals to hungry traders and farmers. But as soon as people tasted her food, everything changed. Her meals were unlike anything they had ever eaten, rich, savory, bursting with flavors no one could describe. The softness of her yam, the tenderness of her meat, the deep, intoxicating spice of her stews. It was as if the food had a power of its own. People lined up at her stall before sunrise, waiting to get a taste. Soon, her food became the center of village life. No festival, no feast, no gathering was complete without a bowl of her steaming stew or a plate of her golden rice. Even the village chief ordered his servants to bring her food to his home daily. But while the village celebrated Nshala's cooking, strange things began to happen. At first, the changes were small. Children who once rushed home after school to eat their mother's meals now begged for money to buy food from Nshala instead. They whined and cried, refusing to eat anything cooked at home. "I don't want Mama's food," little Tobi cried one evening, pushing away the bowl of rice his mother had prepared. "I want the Nshala's food." His mother, Mama Tobi, was heartbroken. "But I made your favorite," she pleaded, trying to feed him. But the boy turned his face away, the scent of home-cooked food no longer enough to satisfy him. It wasn't just the children. Husbands stopped coming home for meals. Before Nshala arrived, every evening was the same. Men would return from the farms or the market, settle on their chairs, and enjoy their wives' cooking. But now, the men ate before they got home. They spent their evenings at Nshala's stall, savoring her meals, leaving nothing for their wives to serve them. One evening, Mama Tobi set the table, expecting her husband to come home hungry. But when he finally arrived, he rubbed his stomach and sighed. "I'm not hungry," he said. "I already ate." "You ate." Mama Tobi's heart sank. "I stopped by Nshala's stall," he admitted. "Her goat stew was too good to resist. Maybe I'll eat later." But he never did. Night after night, the same thing happened not just to Mama Tobi, but to many women in the village. Their husbands stopped craving their food. Their children no longer rushed home for dinner. Families sat at their tables in silence, their meals untouched, the scent of Nshala's food filling the air from the market. The women were losing their place in their own homes. At first, the women of the village suffered in silence. They watched as their children refused to eat at home, pushing aside meals they once loved. They saw their husbands arrive home late, their stomachs full, their appetites gone. "I made his favorite soup," Mama Sod muttered to Mama Tobi one afternoon. "Spiced okra with fresh fish. But he didn't even taste it. Said he wasn't hungry." Mama Tobi sighed. "Okafor does the same thing. He barely touches my food anymore." They weren't alone. At the river, where women gathered to wash clothes, they spoke in hushed tones. "I caught my son sneaking out with coins this morning," one woman whispered. "He wanted to buy food from that Nshala woman." "My daughter stole money from my wrapper," another admitted, shame heavy in her voice. "Just to eat at her stall." The stories kept piling up. Husbands who once praised their wives' cooking now craved only one thing: Nshala's meals. Children who used to run home after school now spent their afternoons at the market, waiting in line at her stall. And then, the worst of it came. One evening, as Mama Tobi sat outside her home peeling cassava, she overheard two men talking. "I tell you, my friend, if my wife could cook like Nshala, I'd never leave home," one of them joked. His companion laughed. "You're lucky she even tries. I don't bother eating at home anymore. My wife's food tastes like ash compared to Nshala's." Mama Tobi's hands trembled, the cassava slipping from her grasp. Her heart ached. The women of the village had always taken pride in feeding their families. A meal was more than just food. It was love, it was tradition, it was a bond between a wife and her husband, a mother and her children. But now, Nshala had taken that away from them. The women realized it wasn't just about the food, it was about control. Nshala was stealing their families, their roles, their place in the home. The question was, how? At first, they tried to compete. They bought the finest ingredients, spent hours grinding spices, marinating meats, perfecting their recipes. But no matter how hard they tried, their food never tasted the same. Some tried watching Nshala, hoping to learn her secret. But she never bought ingredients. She never prepared her meals in public. She simply appeared every morning with full pots of food. It was not natural. Mama Tobi was the first to say what they were all thinking. "This is not ordinary," she whispered one night to a gathering of women. "There is something unnatural about her food." The women shivered. They had heard stories before, of witches who could bewitch food, of spirits who could take human form, of dark forces that could make a meal more than just a meal. Was Nshala one of them? Mama Tobi didn't know. But she intended to find out. Determined to uncover the truth, Mama Tobi waited until the market emptied. She hid behind a stall and watched as Nshala packed up her pots. Silently, Nshala began pushing her cart away from the village, her figure disappearing into the darkness. Mama Tobi followed, keeping a safe distance. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The moon, once bright, seemed to fade behind thick clouds. The air smelled damp, heavy with the scent of earth and something metallic, something Mama Tobi could not place. She had never been this deep into the forest before. Each step forward sent a shiver down her spine. Strange sounds echoed around her, not the usual hoots of owls or rustling of small creatures, but something else. Something watching. Nshala moved as though she knew the forest well, never hesitating, never pausing. Mama Tobi swallowed hard. Was she following a human? Or something else? After what felt like an eternity, Nshala finally stopped. Before her stood an ancient tree, its roots thick and coiling into the earth like massive snakes. Beneath it lay a stone slab, its surface covered in strange markings that pulsed as if alive. Mama Tobi ducked behind a bush, her heart pounding. Nshala placed her pots beside the slab and knelt down. Then, she began to whisper. The words sent chills through Mama Tobi's bones. They were not the words of any language she knew. They were old, wrong words that did not belong to the world of the living. The air grew heavier. A deep hum filled the clearing, as if the earth itself was responding. And then, it happened. The ground trembled. The stone slab slid open with a terrible grinding sound. Mama Tobi clasped her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. From the darkness below, a figure emerged. At first, she thought it was a person. But then she saw it clearly. Its skin was gray, stretched too tightly over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, empty pits of darkness. Mama Tobi's stomach turned. The meat in Nshala's pots did not come from animals. Terror gripped her, but before she could move, the bush beside her shuddered. Something was behind her. She turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat. Two glowing eyes stared at her from the shadows. Mama Tobi ran. She didn't think, didn't breathe, she just ran. Branches whipped against her skin. Roots clawed at her feet. The forest was alive around her, whispering, shifting, closing in. Behind her, footsteps pounded the ground, but they weren't alone. Something else was moving through the trees. A low growl rumbled through the night. A shadow lunged from the darkness, claws slashing toward her. Mama Tobi ducked just in time, the wind of its movement brushing past her ear. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her chest burned, her legs ached, but the village was still too far. Suddenly a hand grabbed her wrist. She screamed, twisting, expecting to see a monster. But it was Nshala. Her grip was like iron, her nails too sharp, her eyes gleaming with something inhuman. "You should not have come here," she whispered, her voice barely human. Mama Tobi struggled, kicking, clawing, trying to break free. "Let me go," she gasped. Nshala tilted her head, studying her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her lips. "You are strong," she said. "Too strong to waste." Mama Tobi didn't understand until she saw Nshala's other hand. She was holding a knife. A sacrificial blade, ancient and covered in strange carvings. Mama Tobi's breath hitched. She was meant to be the next offering. "No!" Mama Tobi roared, summoning every ounce of strength left in her. She threw her head forward, slamming it into Nshala's face. Nshala stumbled back, surprised. It was just enough. Mama Tobi yanked her wrist free and ran for her life. The trees blurred past her. She could still hear Nshala behind her, still feel the presence of whatever lived in that cursed clearing. But she didn't stop. Not until she saw the first glimmer of the village's torches. Not until she heard the familiar voices of her people. She burst into the open, gasping, shaking, barely able to stand. Villagers rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern. "Mama Tobi, what happened?" She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She turned back toward the forest. But there was nothing. No Nshala. No shadows. No sign that anything unnatural had happened. Only the silence of the trees, as if they had swallowed the horror whole. The next morning, Nshala was back at the market. Her stall was set up as usual, her pot steaming, her face calm and unreadable. It was as if nothing had happened. Mama Tobi watched her from across the market, her hands clenched into fists. She knew the truth now. But how could she make the others see? She had escaped with her life, but the battle was far from over. Mama Tobi could barely sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the lifeless body emerging from the earth, the eerie glow in Nshala's eyes, the monstrous figure lurking in the shadows of the forest. She had to warn the village. At the first light of dawn, she rushed to the marketplace, where the other women were setting up their stalls. She grabbed Mama Shade's arm, her voice frantic. "I know the truth," she gasped. "Nshala's food, it's cursed. She doesn't cook like we do. I saw her. I followed her last night into the forest." The women turned to look at her, their faces filled with confusion. "What are you saying, Mama Tobi?" Mama Sard frowned. "I saw her perform a ritual." Mama Tobi's voice trembled. "There is a stone hidden deep in the forest." She opened it with strange words, and a body came out. "That's where her meat comes from." A silence fell over the market. Then, laughter. Mama Uju waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, Mama Tobi. You must have had a bad dream." "It was not a dream." Mama Tobi snapped. "I saw it with my own eyes." But the women only shook their heads. "Mama Tobi, you sound crazy," one of them muttered. Mama Tobi's face burned with frustration. "I am telling you the truth. Nshala is not an ordinary woman. Her food is cursed. You want us to believe that she is feeding the village human flesh?" Mama Sard scoffed. "That she is some kind of witch?" "Mama Tobi, please, stop this nonsense." Mama Tobi turned to the men, hoping they would listen. But they, too, dismissed her. "Ah, leave that woman alone," one of them chuckled. She's just upset because her husband prefers Nshala's cooking. I ate Nshala's food just this morning, another man said, licking his lips. I feel fine. Mama Tobi gritted her teeth, shaking with frustration. You are all under her spell. That is why you cannot see the truth. But no one listened. For days, Mama Tobi tried to make people believe her, but the more she spoke, the more they laughed at her. Her husband was no different. Enough, woman, he scolded one evening when she tried to convince him again. You embarrass yourself with these foolish stories. But I said enough, he snapped. If you do not stop, I will not speak to you again. Mama Tobi swallowed back her tears. She was alone. The village was blind to the evil in their midst. She knew that if she kept speaking, they might turn against her completely. She needed proof. Desperately, Mama Tobi sought out the oldest man in the village, Baba Olyemo, the elder who knew the ways of the spirits. She found him outside his hut, hunched over a small fire, his white beard thick and his wrinkled face filled with wisdom. Baba, I need your help, she pleaded, kneeling before him. He peered at her with sharp eyes. What troubles you, child? She took a deep breath and told him everything. How Nshala's food was bewitching the village, how the people no longer ate at home, how she had followed Nshala into the forest and seen the terrible ritual. When she finished, Baba Olyemo was silent for a long time. Then, he sighed. I feared this day would come. Mama Tobi's heart pounded. You believe me? Baba Olyemo nodded gravely. Nshala is not ordinary human. I have long suspected that her power is not of this world. She is using a spirit that feeds on devotion, controlling people through the food she prepares. The more they eat, the more they belong to her. Mama Tobi shivered. How do we stop her? Baba Olyemo reached into a small wooden chest and pulled out a tiny pouch made from woven fibers. This contains the sacred dust of the ancestors, he explained. It will break her connection to the spirits that empower her. But be warned, she will know the moment her strength begins to fade. Mama Tobi took the pouch carefully, nodding. I will do whatever it takes. Mama Tobi knew she couldn't confront Nshala alone. She needed help, but finding allies would be difficult. The villagers were still under Nshala's spell, blinded by the food they craved. She had to be careful. One by one, she approached those she knew had suffered the most. Wives whose husbands no longer ate at home, mothers whose children refused their meals, and young men who had lost their strength and willpower under Nshala's influence. Late at night, under the cover of darkness, she gathered them in the abandoned hut at the edge of the village. This is not just about food, Mama Tobi said, her voice low but firm. Nshala has cast a spell over this village. She has made our men weak, our children distant, our homes broken. Some of them shifted uncomfortably. How do you know this? A young man, Ode, asked. She has done nothing but cook. Maybe we are simply drawn to good food. Mama Tobi met his gaze. Then why is it that you eat until your belly is full, yet you crave more? Why do our children cry if they are not given her food? Why do men forget the love of their wives for a mere plate of stew? Silence fell over the group. Then, one of the older women spoke. I have felt it, she whispered. My husband has not touched my cooking in months. And when I tried to eat her food, I felt something unnatural, like I had lost myself in it. A few others nodded in agreement. Mama Tobi took a deep breath. She is no ordinary cook. She is something else. And if we do not act now, she will own this village. The young men looked at each other. They had long ignored the discomfort in their hearts, the strange power her food seemed to hold over them. But hearing it spoken aloud, feeling the weight of it in the air, they could no longer deny it. Ode clenched his fists. So what do we do? Mama Tobi held up a small pouch. Baba Olyemo has given me the means to weaken her. But once she is weak, we must act fast. If we let her escape, she will return stronger. The young men exchanged glances before nodding. We will help you, Ode said. That night they planned. They would wait until the busiest time in the market, when Nshala was surrounded by customers, too distracted to sense the trap. Mama Tobi would sprinkle the sacred dust on her, severing her connection to her dark powers. And then, the young men would strike, dragging her from her throne of food and exposing her for what she truly was. The plan was set. And the next day, the village would finally see Nshala for the monster she was. That morning, she made her way to the market. The scent of Nshala's cooking filled the air, rich, intoxicating, almost impossible to resist. The villagers, as always, crowded around her stall, eager to buy her food. Mama Tobi forced herself to breathe through her mouth, refusing to let the aroma cloud her thoughts. She pushed forward through the crowd, clutching the sacred dust in her hand. As she reached Nshala's stall, she pretended to trip, falling forward. With a swift, practiced motion, she let the dust slip from her fingers. It settled on Nshala's bare arms like a faint shimmer, invisible to the naked eye. At first, nothing happened. Then, Nshala froze. Her fingers, which had been skillfully stirring a pot, twitched unnaturally. A violent shudder ran through her body, as if something deep within her was rebelling. Her breath hitched. The energy she had always carried, the dark force that had allowed her to manipulate taste, hunger, and desire, was slipping away. She gripped the edge of her stall, her sharp nails digging into the wood. Something was wrong. She turned her gaze sharply, scanning the crowd, and her eyes locked onto Mama Tobi. For the first time, fear flickered across her usually impassive face. Mama Tobi didn't hesitate. She spun around and darted toward a group of young men she had secretly gathered earlier. Men who had grown tired of seeing their wives and mothers humiliated, tired of the control Nshala had over their homes. She is weak now, Mama Tobi whispered fiercely. This is our chance. Take her. The young men did not hesitate. They surged forward, pushing through the shocked crowd. Nshala tried to step back, but her body was sluggish. She attempted to snatch up a handful of food, to use it as a final weapon, but her fingers trembled, her power failing her completely. Strong hands grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back. She screamed, an unearthly sound, raw with rage and fear. The villagers gasped. For the first time, they saw her as she truly was. No longer the untouchable cook. No longer the woman they worshipped for her food. Just a frightened, powerless creature, caught at last. As the young men dragged her from her stall, the crowd hesitated, uncertain. But then someone shouted, "She has controlled us for too long." Another voice joined in. "She bewitched us." The anger that had been buried under years of enchantment began to rise. The crowd followed, their murmurs growing louder as they made their way toward the village square. By the time they reached the village square, nearly the entire community had gathered. People whispered, their voices filled with a mix of shock and fury. The elders, who had once sat quietly, watching from the shadows, now stepped forward, their faces grim. Nshala was forced to her knees, her once proud stature reduced to nothing. Her fine clothes, once vibrant, now clung to her as she trembled in the dirt. Mama Tobi stepped forward, facing her at last. "You deceived us," Mama Tobi said, her voice steady. "You stole our husbands from their homes, made our children crave your food more than their own mother's cooking. You brought suffering upon this village." Nshala sneered, her lips curling despite her weakness. "I gave them what they wanted," she hissed. "You think they came to me because of magic? No, they came because my food was better than yours. Because I satisfied their hunger in a way you never could." Mama Tobi's jaw tightened, but she did not waver. "You bewitched them," she said. "But your time is over." She turned to the crowd. "What should we do with her?" There was no hesitation. "Punish her," a voice called. "She must pay for what she has done." Nshala's eyes darted around wildly. She could feel the energy of the crowd shifting, turning against her completely. A rock flew through the air. It struck her shoulder, making her wince. Then another. And another. The first few stones only grazed her, but then the rain of rocks began in earnest. She shrieked, trying to shield herself, but there was no escaping it. The villagers she had controlled, the people who had once begged for her food, now had no mercy. The betrayal, the lost years, the ruined marriages, all of it came crashing down in a fury of stone and dust. Nshala's screams became ragged, her body crumbling under the assault. Panting, Nshala turned to face the villagers. "You cannot stop me," she shrieked. "I have fed generations before you, and I will feed generations after you." But the villagers stood firm. "You will feed no one ever again," Mama Tobi declared. She tried to speak again, to curse them one last time, but her voice failed. And then, at last, she fell. A hush fell over the village square. The woman who had haunted them for years was gone. Mama Tobi inhaled deeply, looking at the faces of the villagers. Faces that, for the first time in a long while, looked free. The nightmare had ended. The village had reclaimed itself. And Nshala would never feed them again. For days, the villagers spoke of nothing else. Some could not believe it. Others wept, realizing what they had done under Nshala's spell, how they had abandoned their families, their wives, their homes. One by one, the men returned to their wives, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. The children, once addicted to Nshala's meals, sat once more at their family tables, their stomachs craving the taste of home. And Mama Tobi? She was no longer just a mother, no longer just a food seller. She was the woman who had saved the village. The chief summoned her to his hut, offering her a seat of honor. "You have shown bravery beyond measure," he said. "You saw the truth when no one else did. From this day on, let it be known, Mama Tobi is the protector of the village." The people cheered her name, their voices filled with gratitude. And as the sun set over the village, for the first time in months, the air was filled with the scent of home-cooked meals. The spell was broken. The people were free. But the legend of the Nshala would never be forgotten.
Dear viewers, what lessons do you take from this chilling tale? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay safe. And be careful where you eat.